Western perspective. Indeed, if we think about it, how many freedom fighters has been fighting against Western imperialism, colonialism, and occupation that ended up being labeled with such negative connotation? Nelson Mandela, for example, was fighting for the right of its own people, for its own freedom, against an apartheid. Yet, he ended up being the one called the terrorist. Yaa Asantewaa, one of the Queen Mother of Ghana, eventually became Ghana. She was exhausted of the British imperialism and occupation. She decided to fight back, yet she was the one who was needed to go for an exile. Thomas Sankara. Guys, if you never read about Thomas Sankara, please go and search about him. The work that he did within our African continent has been incredible, admirable. Yet, likewise, he was the one that ended up being labeled as an issue. And the story keeps on going all around the world, in every continent, naming it. Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and also Cabral. I cannot forget about Cabral. We are here thanks to this man. We are here enjoying what we call independency, thanks to this radical revolutionary. Yet, nowadays, all of this, all of their work, all of their radicalization has been almost placed into the fog, into like, let's not talk about it. Yet, what is the essence of their work? What is the essence of their radicalization? What the term radical really means? You see, the word radical comes from the Latin word, which literally is called radix, that translates into root. So when we're talking about a radical revolution, we're talking about a revolution that tackles the root cause of the matter. You see, if a tree falls sick, we wouldn't try to heal the fruit, but what we would do, we would try to nurture the root. And I love the actual meaning of this word because it really captures the perfect essence, metaphorically and physically, about our topic today, to go back to our roots. But how can we go back to our roots if we keep neglecting our roots? So today I would like to share with you my own journey back to my own roots. This is my father, my handsome Ghanaian father, coming from the eastern region of Ghana, a beautiful region, a beautiful place called Latte, majestic. If you've never been, you're missing out. As for her, she's my mother, my beautiful mother, coming from Italy, from the southern part of Italy, from a beautiful, amazing place at the foothills of Mount Vesuvio, a place called Napoli. This is me at the age of 2. I was born and raised in Milan, in the north of Italy. Because of my tender age, I was not capable of contextualizing it. Yet, I never felt home. I never felt fully accepted. I was going to school, formally getting the education, yet nobody ever educated me about what racism was about. I was just experiencing it on a daily basis. As I was introduced in the workforce, I remember so clearly the suffocation that I received from the 9 to 5. The suffocation from the constant exploitation of the working class, the exploitation of nature, the constant consumerism. I felt like really I was not able to breathe fresh air. I wanted to create a change around me, but was I able to change? I remember that reading and watching documentaries became like my portal towards my realm of freedom. I remember reading this quote from Gautama Buddha that was saying, we cannot even understand one simple leaf without understanding and learning about the soil, about the water, about the sun. This very quote made me realize that we are the byproduct of our environment. And me being part of the rat race was merely part of the issue that was within and around me. I furthermore went into searching, trying to see more way of living outside of this post-colonial world. I remember learning more about indigenous communities scattered all around the world, living a life in perfect symbiosis with nature. A life of the perfect representation of radicalization, of radicalism. Are they still alive? Am I going to be able to live like that? If so, can I implement the knowledge within this 21st century? I guess I was about to find it out. At the age of 20, I gathered all my courage, my little to no savings, and I went for a journey, went towards the unknown, not knowing that I was never to go back within that very lifestyle. This journey brought me all around the world for almost a decade, touching many corners of the world, especially the global south. It was a journey of a kind, a journey that became my natural university. I was learning from Earth, from the universe, from the people. I started learning from the Aboriginal people of Australia, while in Australia, learning from their wisdom, from their way of being radical, from the ancestral knowledge, from the connection to the land. Learning in India, from thousands of years of ancestral history and cultural practices. In Samoa, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, learning, being introduced about self-sustainability, about natural building, natural farming. In Aotearoa, nowadays known as New Zealand, reconnecting to the essence and the spirit of the land, the spirit of the earth, the spirit of myself, recognizing that this separation among us and nature was just a big illusion. And so also in South Africa, learning more about ancestral practices from our own ancestors. And the journey kept on going in all the continents for many years, literally having the sky as my roof, the earth as my bed, often even crossing borders by bicycle, having strangers, complete strangers that welcome me as part of their family. I never felt so accepted in my whole life. Likewise, having elders that became my teachers, mountains and rivers becoming my mentors. And I was really introduced to a way of living that I could only see during those documentaries. People capable of living in such a way where the health and wealth of our environment was directly proportional to the health and wealth of our community. Where the health and wealth of our community was directly proportional to the health and wealth of each individual. And to think that these very people are those that are suffering the most from the climate that we are changing, because of the technology and clothing that we crave and that we waste that ended up in landfills, especially in the global south, especially in our African continent, because of the insane amount of resources that we need in order to satisfy this greedy lifestyle that creates a crazy exploitation of the land, of our people, especially in our African continent. I felt like I didn't want to be responsible for that. I felt that something had to change, and I felt that this change couldn't come from a political party or anything. It needed to come from myself. And so I decided to deeply radicalize myself, to go back to the roots. I'm going to look for a piece of land where I'm going to work from, for, and with the roots. And so I went for another year of exploration, looking for this piece of land. It lasted for about, a little while, about a year, as I mentioned. And I remember at the end of this year, I was kind of about to lose hope. And then my father, just almost like in a movie, he was like, "But Joshua, do you know that we have lands in Ghana?" I was like, "Oh, thank you, Pa, for letting me know right now, after 1 year." So the land was left in heritage by my great-grandparents, my great-grandmother Nyankor and my great-grandfather, as you can see in the picture, Ochiame Yawesiedu. They left the land in heritage for the upcoming generation, leaving maybe the most precious thing that we could ever have. Regardless where the world is going to, we always going to eat and drink and breathe from the land. And appreciate so much what they left for us. And they literally planted in this very land different cacao trees. By the way, they were still there. And so next things I know, I'm back in Ghana and back in the ancestral land. As you can see, this literally was day one. Day one, the land was bushy, was hardly walkable. I was alone, no cars could access the land, no running water, no electricity. Yet, with the knowledge that I gathered in my previous years of natural university, I started to clean the land with a machete. I started to dig, literally looking for water with hand tools. I started to build my own house with my own hands and natural precious resources. And before I knew it, I literally created an off-grid eco-village. Here I was also planting different food forests and medicinal forests. I was intending to really recreate a space where I don't need to go to the grocery shop in order to get my food. I don't need to go to the farmers in order to get my medicine. Everything is in the land. And so I created literally my own space. My own heart became my own land. Everything became intertwined and was such a beautiful, amazing process. And that's the thing, often we're trying to go towards that goal, towards that direction, the final product, but we forget about the process. And the process is what gave me the most. I literally created a relationship with the land. Me and the land became one. Like literally a love that it cannot be compared to any type of love. And so, just like that, I felt that this dream couldn't be kept for myself. I needed to share this dream. It was like a sin not to share this dream. But who can I share it with? I'm here alone. And I decided to use social media. I decided to use a platform that everybody's using that can be incredibly distractive or incredibly connective. I decided to use it for its connectiveness. And so I started to share, to learn first of all how to create content, how to tell a story. Started to share it. People started to follow along. One person, two people, 100, 200, more and more and more, starting to interact with my content and my account. People started to reach out, asking if they could have come, learn from me, from the land, from the experience. And so next things I know, I started to host retreat. I started to host people from all over the world coming and learning about ancestral practices, natural living, natural building, natural farming, herbal medicine, ancient pottery. And I was also working with the Close By Village, the elders of the Close By Village, close relatively, in order to really not just to share their knowledge and wisdom, but especially to preserve it, to create a platform in order for them to earn money and therefore also adding value with practices and skills that they once considered useless. And so just like that, we started to change the paradigm. We started to change and to kill the stereotype. Instead of having people coming to Africa in order to save us, we started to have people coming to Africa in order to learn from us, to learn from our ancestral knowledge, to learn from our practices that literally are the keys for the liberation of our own people and especially for the healing process of ourselves as humans back to the earth.
La Constitution est suspendue.
The Sahel region has been a hotbed for violent extreme activities.
Military rulers tend to be very heavy-handed.
Yes, it is the coup belt, but it's been the coup belt since independence.
The Sahel has faced political, environmental, and security turmoil for decades. And there are more deaths there categorized as terror-related than the rest of the world combined. So what is it about this region that makes it so unstable and one of the most dangerous places to live? And what do Russia, China, and France have to do with it? The Sahel, located just south of the world's largest desert, expands from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east. According to the UN, it is made up of these 10 countries.
They are largely desert areas, lots of pastoralist communities, a lot of Berber communities. The southern parts of those countries tend to be much greener. They are considered to be the breadbaskets of that region. But for the most part, the Sahel is a dry, vast desert area that stretches from Mali all the way to Sudan.
The area has a lot of young people and some of the highest birth rates in the world, with almost 2/3 of the population under 25. It has also been adversely affected by climate change.
The more resources become more scarce, the more they accelerate and contribute towards conflict in the region, because then it's a matter of survival.
A lot of different tribes and ethnic communities call the Sahel home, and tensions between these groups are exacerbated by the lack of resources. All of this has allowed the region to become a crucible for three things: bad governance, extremist organizations, and foreign influence. Since gaining independence in the mid-20th century, genuine democratic exchange in the Sahel has sometimes been hard to come by.
Real democracy has never been experienced by the population at large.
Every country in the Sahel, except Senegal, has experienced a coup or attempted coup in the 21st century, many of them more than once.
Armies in these countries tend to be very heavily politicized as a result of their own colonial histories and their political involvement. During periods of instability, they tend to be predisposed towards intervening politically.
Hunters, governments run by military officers, have been found across most of the Sahelian countries at one time or another, and these hunters often have popular support.
What is very important is that people have been protesting for change, and for them the change has been the new military rule. People are supporting the military powers today.
Citizens in Mali were protesting President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta for months before the coup in 2021, calling for his resignation amid complaints of corruption, poor management of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the government's failure to tackle Islamist insurgents. The inability to combat the ongoing jihadi crisis was also central to the coup, which took place in Burkina Faso 8 months later. The following year, Niger's pro-Western president Mohamed Bazoum was overthrown in a military coup amidst a climate of anti-French sentiment and yet another perceived failure to combat insurgent groups in the region.
It is very important to look at the reason why militarism is so widespread in the region. The military have also been very powerful, very often under civilian rule.
So once they are in power, how have the hunters dealt with the security threats in the Sahel?
Unfortunately, they haven't done a very good job as well. In fact, things have gotten worse under their rulership. Perhaps amongst other things because they aren't necessarily trained, to be able to manage public administration as compared to being military officers.
Africa has tragically remained the epicenter of global terrorism.
In 2024, there were more terror-related deaths in the region than the rest of the world combined, according to the Global Terror Index.
There are two main groups that are operating in the Sahel. One of them is Al-Qaeda's Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam al-Muslimin, and the other one is Islamic State, which calls itself the Sahel province.
It's important to know that those Al-Qaeda and Islamic State affiliated groups are competing one to each other. So it is absolutely impossible to consider that there is only one jihadi movement in the region.
Other groups like Boko Haram have gained international notoriety for their activities in the Sahel, such as the kidnapping of 276 Nigerian schoolgirls in 2014, many of whom hadn't returned home 10 years later. Conflict deaths in the Sahel have reached their highest ever level in 2024, surpassing 25,000 for the first time since records began. Back in the central Sahel, where hunters promised to combat jihadist insurgencies, Jenim and IS actually expanded, with the latter doubling the amount of territory they control in Mali. In these areas, the jihadi groups operate a state-like administration, providing services and even enforcing their own criminal code. They often fund this with criminal activities, such as kidnapping for ransom and charging taxes for protection.
You can see that beyond taking the taxes called the zakat, which is an abuse against civilians, they are trying to administer justice, in particular, based on the Sharia law. So they have an alternative kind of governance, which can also be authoritarian, but which is also trying to show some respect to the rights of the population.
These organizations also recruit people to join their ranks.
In many instances, people tend to be in a point of choicelessness by the time they decide to join a militant group. These are communities that are very vulnerable. They are caught between a wave of militant attacks and sometimes allegations of government abuses for being seen as cooperating with militants.
But not everyone is willing to sign up with these insurgents. Self-defense organizations have sprung up across the Sahel, sometimes backed by the state.
What is very interesting as regards self-defense groups is that they have been set by the populations themselves.
With more citizens taking up arms, what used to be occasional inter-communal fighting has now turned into violent conflict, creating more opportunities for Jenim and IS. But insurgent groups are not the only outsiders with an interest in the Sahel.
You have lots of foreign influences in the Sahel, and all of them has been changing in the recent years.
Like a lot of Africa, many Sahelian countries were former colonies of Western powers, specifically France.
The central government, unable to cope with rebellion in such a vast and undeveloped territory, has had to turn to France for help.
In the middle of the 20th century, they gained independence, but France maintained a heavy hand in the region, known as France-Afrique, and often involved itself militarily in the Sahel.
The approach adopted by France was the need to strengthen the militarized approach. And this approach, in many ways, wasn't devoid of an existing belief amongst the region that this was simply reenactment of colonial objectives.
This discontent often fueled protests against governments that were seen to be too close to France.
When it was becoming glaring that French presence in the region wasn't necessarily solving the problem, the junta stepped in and amplified the narrative that said, hey, it's time to leave.
Other Western states and organizations have also reduced their presence in the Sahel. The MINUSMA, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, was one of the deadliest and costliest peacekeeping missions of all time. But its withdrawal is creating a vacuum for other powers to move in. Russian propaganda in the Sahel has largely been framed around Western failures in counter-terrorism. The paramilitary group Wagner, which has rebranded to Africa Corps since its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin's death in 2023, has also maintained a presence in the region.
The Wagner Group had come in as a private security firm that would support the Sahelian governments to be able to take control of their counterinsurgency operations. There was a long time where Russia was denying the links between them. Their work is to train and to support the local armies to be able to counter the insurgency in the region. So far, it hasn't been as effective.
These Russian-backed militia have developed very close ties with some governments.
Russia's effectiveness hasn't yet been proven, but because the military governments have little choice in security partners, they are willing to maintain, or they're more eager to maintain, Russian paramilitary presence and security support.
Russia would appear to be interested in the Sahel since it holds the key to migration routes from sub-Saharan Africa into Europe, enabling it to put pressure on European countries. But minerals also play a key role. Niger is the 7th largest producer of uranium in the world, which makes it an important source for countries like China who want to expand their nuclear power plants. But uranium is not the only valuable natural resource in the Sahel. Gold mining is often unregulated and also a huge source of income for local governments, militias, insurgent groups, and criminal organizations alike.
The industrial sector is still very much controlled by the government, but artisanal mines are areas where militant groups, because of essentially lawlessness, they're able to now drive and impose rules and taxes and even sell the gold for themselves.
China is also investing and involving itself in the Sahel for these rich mineral resources it needs for technology and other industrial advancements.
Something that hasn't received so much attention is the hardware component of AI. Now we need to think about the mineral resources that are required, to create the hardware components of AI. All right, and some of these, a huge amount of some of these resources can be found in the Sahel region.
China's Belt and Road Initiative, an immense global infrastructure project, has touched every country in the Sahel in the superpower's bid to increase its influence. The Sahel and all its natural resources is poised to become an important place in the coming years.
The situation in the Sahel is not going to get better anytime soon. And one of the reasons why is because the states in the region are particularly fragile.
The likelihood of military rule ending at this point seems quite diminished. The fact that people will still continue to be at the center of insurgencies in the coming years is likely to continue being a mainstay.
With extremism, instability and poverty on the rise, is the Sahel the most dangerous place on earth?
10 years ago, a violent uprising began. Since then, it's shaken the northeast of Nigeria and neighboring countries. It's a conflict that's killed more than 30,000 people and displaced millions more. I'm talking, of course, of Boko Haram. But who are Boko Haram? And what? So how did it all begin? Boko Haram means Western education is forbidden. It was formed by this man, Mohammed Yusuf. He hated the West and was very critical of the government, which he saw as corrupt and un-Islamic. He set up a religious complex, including a mosque and an Islamic school in Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State. He was a charismatic speaker whose followers were a mixed bag, not only some of society's poorest, but also upper class and university students who invited him to speak on campus.
They accepted their ideology, they accepted the belief of establishing a theocratic Islamic state, and all the people who joined him, even though Muhammad Yusuf was attending to their needs, he was providing some social services to them, but the core reason why most of them joined is the ideology.
In July 2009, Boko Haram staged a failed uprising against the Nigerian government. 800 people were killed and many of their members arrested. Authorities thought they'd successfully crushed the group when Muhammad Yusuf was killed in police custody. But that July uprising marked the beginning of a 10-year-long battle that continues till this day. Just a year after the uprising, one of Yusuf's lieutenants, Abubakar Shekau, announced he was now the new leader of Boko Haram. The re-emergence of Boko Haram under Shekau's leadership marked one of the first times when authorities claimed to have defeated Boko Haram, only for the group to resurface. It's a pattern that would be repeated time and again over the next decade. In August 2011, Boko Haram made international headlines when it sent a car bomb into the United Nations compound in Abuja. 23 people were killed and more than 75 injured. The next few years would be some of the group's deadliest. Between 2013 and 2015, Boko Haram killed more than 11,000 people.
It was impossible to count the number of dead bodies. There were so many women, men, and children.
During that period, the group seized more and more territory, and by 2015 was in control of much of Nigeria's Borno state. It also spread its attacks beyond Nigeria's borders to neighboring Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. As people fled the terror, the UN estimates that over 2.2 million people were displaced. But Boko Haram's most notorious attacks were when they targeted schoolgirls. One night in April of 2014, students of the girls' secondary school of the northern town of Chibok were sleeping in their dormitories. Armed members of Boko Haram stormed the boarding school. They bundled 276 terrified schoolgirls together and took them away. The abduction led to global outrage. Prominent global figures asked for more to be done to free the girls.
Over 100 students are kidnapped by suspected
the Chibok girls have received international plan to stand with Nigeria.
The Nigerian government should have shared it.
They don't really understand Islam.
But although a number of them have been released in the last 5 years, more than 100 of the students are still missing. The Chibok incident showed Boko Haram kidnappings could bring them publicity. 4 years after Chibok, they abducted 110 schoolgirls from the town of Dapchi. Most were released a month later. But one of them, a Christian student called Leah Sharibu, remains in captivity. Her peers say she refused to give up her faith. Since 2013, more than 1,000 children have been abducted by the terror group. The Nigerian military have been criticized for their failure to free those kidnapped by Boko Haram. Low morale and corruption have left the army floundering, but Boko Haram's shifting strategy, including the use of female suicide bombers, has made them hard to pin down. In recent years, Boko Haram has fractured and split, forging new alliances and developing new tactics. In 2015, Boko Haram lost its self-proclaimed capital Gwoza to Nigerian troops. Over time, the government has taken back territory, forcing the group towards the hilly areas east of Gwoza, as well as Lake Chad and the Sambisa forest. Whilst losing territory, Abubakar Shekau looked for new international allies. He pledged allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. But IS had other ideas. A year later, it announced that the new leader of what was now known as the Islamic State West Africa province was Abu Musab al-Banawi. Remember this guy, Muhammad Yusuf, the founder of Boko Haram? Well, al-Banawi is believed to be his son. Although he keeps a low profile, there are no verified images of him. So Boko Haram was now split. Abubakar Shekau remained in control of another faction, now known as Jama'atu Ahlussunnah lil Dawa wal Jihad, or JAS, to you and me. The Islamic State West Africa province, also known as ISWAP, has developed new tactics, focusing on winning the hearts and minds of the communities, the territory it controls.
ISWAP tactic now, it's actually is a combination of not just warfare, but it's also a combination of a state building project. So ISWAP is actually engaging in that state building project, having their own judicial system where they establish court judgment, also monitoring like economic activities, especially the fish farming, the cattle rearing, and the farming activity in the region. Now, all of these activities were not the activities that we saw from Boko Haram at the early and the nascent stage.
As IS's caliphate is lost in the Middle East, ISWAP is attempting to establish one in West Africa. If it's successful, this insurgency could be around for another decade.